So I don't know if you remember this, the good folks over at Wells Fargo. Dude, Wells Fargo is just the gift that keeps on giving. Like, I'm not even kidding you. So Wells Fargo got caught because they were hosting, allegedly, of course. It's all alleged. It's all alleged. It's all alleged. Wells Fargo don't come from my ass, right? But supposedly Wells Fargo got caught hosting fake interviews for minority candidates and women. So they knew that they weren't going to hire these people, but so they hit like quotas and they kind of insulate themselves from having any type of lawsuit from a minority group. And by minority group in this case, I'm talking about like a racial minority or ethnic minority or women. To insulate themselves, they would host these like fake interviews, and they got caught, and the whole thing was blown. I think it was a whistleblower who reported to like the New York Post and a few different other outlets, and it just seems like another scandal has hit Wells Fargo. And I got to be honest, at this stage of the game, I'm not surprised. Like, to me, the Wells Fargo brand went from being like very wholesome and like folksy, and it seemed that Buffett kind of was the same way for a while, and he's since distanced himself because he realized that they're not what they portrayed themselves to be for many years, in both, lending and we saw they had that fine that they paid for churning accounts, and I think John Stumpf was the CEO at the time. He had to step down, and there's a whole lot of scandals and controversies going on with that. But it just seems that everywhere this company goes, there's just another scandal around the corner. It's fucking unbelievable. And especially in the banking sector where people already, like the general public already can't stand banks. It's like you literally could just like fucking sneeze the wrong way and everyone's going to have a fit, especially after '08, dude. No one trusts banks in America anymore, and they're just adding more fuel to the fire. It's pretty remarkable.
Well, I mean, why should anybody trust banks? These banks they constantly get into scandals. They constantly getting fined. If you look at another bank, Deutsche Bank recently got fined for greenwashing their funds. So basically, certain investors or whatever they want to invest in these like economically friendly companies and etc. So like these banks will they'll raise funds to basically invest in these economically friendly securities. And basically, Deutsche Bank was basically they had these funds. They said that they were like economically friendly. Uh, it was an economically friendly fund, but they basically weren't investing in these economically friendly companies. So they got in trouble with that, and they got raided in Frankfurt. Basically, the German police went and raided their headquarters. And then with Goldman Sachs, you saw that as well with 1MDMB with that guy
That was the Malaysia
Lau.
fund, right?
Yeah, how the guy was like
Okay.
laundering money from Malaysia through Goldman Sachs. So you see these banks, they're always getting into these scandals, and they basically getting fined is just the cost of business for them.
And the Deutsche Bank thing that you're referring to, is that like an ESG designation? That's the environmental social governance identification that companies are being aligned with right now. Is that what that is? ESG?
Yeah, they basically had to invest in a into ESG companies. So basically it's easier to raise money if you say you're starting a hedge fund or whatever, or some kind of like you're trying to raise like capital. It's easier to raise money if you say you're basically investing in economically uh, friendly things. So basically, people want to deploy their money in economically friendly things. Like BlackRock will refuse to invest in companies that have carbon or whatever. They won't invest in things that are not economically friendly. So there's like a limited access to capital. So if you're able to lie and basically greenwash your funds and say, oh, they're economically friendly when they're not, then you could get the benefit of being economically friendly without giving up the upside of basically returns.
Okay, that makes sense. So they lied and they said that they were investing in ESG companies, and the German police raided them and found that they weren't, obviously, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's what they were
Okay,
doing.
but here's what I have to ask you. And we did talk about this a little bit. and this was in a prior episode. I recommend you go back and listen to this. But um, for ESG companies, right? Like, do we put a lot of faith in the people who review and implement that designation? In other words, do we think that a lot of the, like, I'll give you a great example. Like ExxonMobil, for whatever fucking reason, is in like an ESG index, right? And to me, ESG, I think of a company that's doing well profitability wise, I should say, but also not like, I don't know, dumping oil into the fucking environment, like, or like causing oil spills and stuff like that. So I'm kind of looking at it and I'm like kind of looking at it sideways. It's like, isn't ExxonMobil in the ESG index for the S&P 500, but Tesla isn't? Like, how does that work?
It's basically all a fraud. If you look at even consumer reports and how they basically rank like the safety of cars or whatever, they're basically corrupted by advertising and basically advertisement. So like since Tesla doesn't advertise, they gave Tesla basically an F on their consumer report score. Meanwhile, Tesla is the safest car because it has self driving and it basically saves lives. Meanwhile, they put out like, oh, Tesla self driving accident, causes the death, but they don't look at the millions of times that it saved somebody that was maybe drunk or saved somebody that from committing an accident who's not a good driver. And that's the problem. You don't know the times that you save people, but you know the times that it got into the crash. So I think it's all basically a fraud.
So basically, if you're not in line with the agenda and in line with the narrative being pushed, they're going to use that score and hold it over your head. So I'm getting into like super hypotheticals now, right? But hypothetically, right? What would happen if you, oh, let me look at it this way. This is what I think, and I might be a little kooky thinking this, right? But who's to say? Like, it's such a subjective thing, ESG, right? It's not like a fundamental analysis, like ratio. There's no sort of like empirical data to it. It's just someone there or a group of people, a collective sitting there and going, we're going to give you an A or we're going to give you an F or somewhere in between that range, right? So it just seems like a really subjective way to like grade companies and to like manipulate their stock. Like for publicly traded companies anyway, that is. Like it doesn't look like it's anything more than that. Like how do you rate a company's ability? Think about that. How do you rate a company's ability to like to be either like carbon neutral or do positive things for the environment and like quantify that? Like I don't understand that. How do you quantify how much waste you don't emit? Like that makes no sense to me at all.
Yeah, I think we're in the early days of this. I think the SEC should provide more guidance to basically how this disclosure should be done. And these carbon credits, where these companies are buying carbon credits from basically rainforest in like the Amazon or whatever, that's all bullshit because they basically polluting the environment and then they buy these carbon credits and there's basically no auditing to see how many times these carbon credits were sold. They could have been sold 10, 15, 20 times. So are you really offsetting your pollution? No, there's basically an overselling of carbon credits duplicated 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 times. So this is all like, we're early on in the process and we need a lot more guidance on basically how do we keep track of these carbon credits? How do we make sure they're not being duplicated? How do we make sure that these ESG requirements are basically standard across the industry and because you need standard requirements, you can't just have a subjective score that doesn't make any sense. Because as you said, you saw ExxonMobil, on the ESG list. Meanwhile, Tesla, the most eco-friendly company there is, not on the list.